So today we're doing some Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, some first edition, and it was on my list of things to do, but I was asked a question about something, so I thought, well, I'll bring it forward. So today we're discussing Hirelings, Henchmen, and morale. Alright, so this is a little bit more in depth. It's a lot more situational in terms of how it's played out. But we'll start from the top, which means starting in the middle, and we'll work it from here. Alright, hang on. So if we introduce our heroes for today, we have a Dwarven Fighter Thief, a Half-Elf Fighter Magic User, and a Human Fighter. Pretty sure you can guess which one's which. So their task at this stage is that they need to protect the MacGuffin. That's right, it's a MacGuffin. So part of first edition AD&D, and it's a celebrated part, is the element of hirelings. So within your charisma stat and in your characteristic ability scores, you've got all to do with loyalty and reaction bonuses, modifiers, and all of these. Traditionally, in the more modern forms, charisma is not as important as old days, but it can be quite useful, especially when it comes to the part of hiring people, because as we know, sometimes the game of Dungeons and Dragons is merchants and moneyers, where we're constantly haggling for the tiniest of value, which is not uncommon. Players like to pretend that it's their own money that's being spent sometimes. So with this, the characters have to protect the MacGuffin, and they also know they're outnumbered, outgunned. They're not going to be able to do it for the few days that it takes to get the MacGuffin to where it's supposed to go. Widgetland, Widgetmania, Widgetonia. And so from here to there, they're going to need some help. And this is where the DM, which all the resources usually not always fully available in the DM's guide, but in this instance, it's very well documented. So let's go through some of this. So in the DM's guide, roughly page 29, there's lots and lots of people. This is their monthly cost if you just wanted to hire someone. So what would happen is that the players, deciding that they needed some additional swords, they need some extra people, would have a number of options open to them. The first thing is to walk into a tavern and put up a piece of paper that says, "Wanted, bold warriors of stout heart, please apply here," and have one of those little tear-off taggy things at the bottom of the parchment where they can come and be interviewed and checked out by the players. Now this is all fine, but if you've got a short amount of time, or if you want to bypass some of the more role-playing aspects of some of the weird characters, then the players may decide, hey, where's the nearest mercenaries guild? And we'll just walk in there and say, here's some money, we need some swords, we need some people, what have you got? Yep, and away, hand off. So here we go. We're looking at some of these. Now, all of this is a base price, not an exact price. It's important to get that understanding for the Dungeon Master. Even in the player's handbook, even with these, it might say, here's your daily cost and this is what it should do. But that's in a normal scenario where nothing else is expected of them except for the task at hand. If you've got some soldiers that they know that they're going to be walking into something, they may want a few extra coins. And if you're only hiring for a week, that 2 GP for the short sword, for the short bow, might go to, 3 Electrum or something, depending on what needs to be done. That's like a gold piece and a half. or in silver, paid all in silver, or in an item or something. It doesn't have to specifically be this cost or in these values. And this is where the DM gets to play a little bit of the economist. Okay, I want you to use hirelings, they're going to be cheap. I don't want you to use hirelings, they're going to be expensive. Because a hireling is a guy that you just pay the money for and they're done. So now we should probably do some definitions between hireling and henchman. So henchmen are the next step up, and as it says, are highly prized by understanding players. So what the henchman is, that character that is around, that has a little bit more loyalty and is expecting a little bit more equanimity between the PC and the NPC. The henchman is still an NPC, but the player has more control over the fate of that character. So a classic example is the squire, knight errants and those sorts of characters. In literature and legend, we would say there's a chance that Will Scarlet is possibly the henchman to Robin Hood, whereas the band of merry men are hirelings. And so that's pretty much where we get that idea of henchmen / followers. They will often start at first level and would expect to sort of start to be hanging around a player character that is at least 3rd or 4th level. So they can learn from the character. The number of henchmen is definitely limited by the charisma of the character. And we still have the same morales and still the same loyalties, but they've got a few more. They're a bit more loyal. They're a little bit more fanatical in favour of the player, but they're not mindlessly fanatical. So the DM still has overarching say about the personality of the henchman, but the general rule is that as long as you're not asking them to do anything that's too crazy, they're going to go with the plan, because everyone's taking their fair share of risk. And that's pretty much a henchman versus a hireling. How do you get a henchman? Well, it's a similar process. You could put up a sign that says looking for a squire, and somebody will come running. There could be a whole role-playing scenario where the players have to rescue someone, or they rescue someone and in the mix manage to attract a number of followers, a number of people who are willing to work with them. And these henchmen, they don't have to be the same class. Magic users are desperately looking for protection and for a strong arm to keep them employed and to keep them going. And that's where, well, fighters come in handy. Alignments are obviously important, and so on. So having henchmen is that next step up from having hirelings. At first level, the characters are able to walk into a bar and just say, 10 GP for everyone who follows me. Or it's much like the posse, where you just grab a bunch of people and head out to go round up someone. But that's pretty much how a hireling works. You just pay them every day, every week, every month. But with the henchmen, there's usually more of a deeper understanding. Skills, they gain experience at a half the rate of the player. So that's, when you're working out the ratios for experience points, then they get a half share of that experience point. And the PCs take over a part of their training, which is part of the rationale for a PC being a little bit more than first, second and third level when it comes to getting henchmen and followers. Of course, at certain levels, the characters automatically get certain followers and they automatically attract because it's just a part of their class. But this is for the general, I'm walking through the village, I save the village, and you will get someone saying, please let me be your squire and you can train me to be just like you and you're so awesome and you're wonderful and so on. And the fighter says, sure, come along. Because that happens. Well, sometimes. But yes, the henchman is expected to get all sorts of extra benefits versus the hireling who just arrives with what they've got. So our three heroes have wandered into the Mercenaries Guild and laid down some coin. We need to buy some swords or hire some swords for a week. Let's discuss terms and options. So they get these guys. 2 shortbowmen and 4 light infantry. Each of these guys, the DM has decided just to make them similar. They're all 0 level fighters, which is standard for hirelings. And we're looking at 5 hit points each. And about, we'll call them armor class 6. We have the 2 shortbowmen, and we've got 4 others. All up, this would be 8 GP per month. We're only needing them for a week. So we'll do 2.5. After a bit of haggling, 2.5 gold for the week, paid up front. You get 6 guys. While we're on the matter of 0 level fighters, it's worth noting that the 0 level fighter doesn't have the same combat chart as a 1st level fighter. It might look as though it's similar, but the way that the 1st edition works is that the 0 level has a 5% worse off chance. So even though on the face of it it looks like your to hit armor class 0 is 20, it's actually the second 20, not the first 20. So in the way that the 1st edition goes, and in DM's guide there are a number of 20s in a row. The first one is what's called what we used to refer to as the dirty 20, which is just the dice roll plus modifiers and has to equal 20 or higher. And that's your traditional to hit armor class 0 is a 20. But for these guys being 0 level fighters, it's almost like their to hit armor class 10 is a requirement of an 11. So if for them to hit armor class 1, that's a 20. To hit armor class 0, they need to roll a natural 20, regardless of what sort of other modifiers they may have at the time. So that's worth remembering as well, just regarding the hireling status. If you get enough hirelings, you do get leveled characters inside, and they will also affect militia of the morale and so on. But at this stage, we've just looked at these 6 guys, and we've just added this muscle to that. So we're assuming that these guys are about 3rd level. Good enough. Now just for scale, roughly 3 feet for every square. There's the MacGuffin. And we'll carry on from here. It's also important to know who's hiring. Whilst yes, it's coming out of a party purse, this one character is the guy that's hiring because he has the highest charisma. And this charisma is 14, which means that their loyalty base has a 5% modifier. So they've now got a base loyalty of 55. And they'll listen to this guy, and this is in effect their employer. So these other 2 characters, whilst the whole party still count in terms of morale, this is their quote-unquote boss. As a second side note, it's also worth mentioning, that's one good reason for having humans around. because everyone likes a human, and if you look at the racial charts, everyone's neutral towards human. If these guys were all human and from a particular area where they hate half-elves and hate dwarves, then even if they had a higher charisma, they wouldn't want to be following them. It's just the way it works. And that's why sometimes being a human is a good thing. That and the unlimited levels, but still. So the Orc Patrol encounters the party and their hirelings. And this is actually the area where Mr. Gygax talks about the 1d6 flat initiative for both sides, because we've got 12 guys there, we've got 9 guys here, we've got 3 characters, we've got 6 militia, and so on. We've got all sorts of crazy about to happen, and for the sake of the sake, it's easier to roll a single die to manage each team. Imagine if there were wolves in there as well, or they'd had an extra couple of characters and so on. It can get very messy very quickly when you start to hire different types of thing, and you got your henchmen and your followers and so on. So what we're looking at here is how the layout roughly goes. Yeah, all right, doesn't really matter. The point is we've got our orcs up there, we've got our militia down here, and everyone is all fine. The PCs always have an option of running or staying. No one can force them to run or stay unless there was a spell or magical power or an effect of some sort. But for these others, remember the militia are still NPCs, and whilst, yep, the players may have some control, they are NPCs in the hands of the DM. Monsters likewise in the hands of the DM. So the DM does a lot of the heavy lifting, but they will expect the players to still pull some of their own weight. The militia have a 55% loyalty base. Being a one-hit dice monster, these particular orcs are 50%. And then the modifiers occur based on casualties and how the battle is progressing. So let's roll up a few rounds. Initiative, we've got missile fire moving in. Everyone's so far apart that there's no charging. They've just got to move into range and get into combat. The missile fires can do their missile things, and we'll see where it goes from there. So the orcs won initiative. Their archers fired. Everyone moved. So the half-elf took some hits, and they've opted to not fire for the second round. Otherwise it'd be firing melee, and they're just going to move down. And then it's the good guy's turn. Side note, again, because it's always worthwhile, orcs, whilst having an ordinary intelligence, aren't particularly dumb. And the thing to remember as a DM is that we need to make sure that the creatures are played to their strengths and weaknesses as they would know them. Obviously no one walks around with a hit point counter on their head, but you have an idea about what to do. Orcs fight, and orcs have been fighting for a long time, so when it comes to their ability to coordinate attacks, they have an idea on what to do. That's the limit of it, but that's what, they've got one job, and their job is often just to cause problems and to fight, and that's what they do, and they do that kind of well. The idea that just because you're proficient at something and good at something, it can simulate being intelligent because it's just well practiced. So they have a cunning, and the DM needs to keep that in mind because it's different to a dragon. If a dragon was on the board and a dragon was attacking the party, dragons would do different things. And of course the dragon effects, they would have caused all of the 0 levels to run and so on. They've got their own shtick, being dragons, but we got orcs. Alright, continue. So during the combat, it might be fun to say, for the rather than the DM having to do all the rolling, say, right, okay, each player controls 2 of the militia, as well as their character, just to keep them busy, because nobody wants to watch the DM roll dice against themselves, because that's, once you're rolling dice against the NPCs, it can get a bit boring. But that's a Seth Skorkowski topic of beautifully well done. But anyway, we'll get some dice rolled, why not? So after that first round of combat, we had some hits and misses. We got some, the ones laying down have become dead. So we got some dead orcs. Remember when the orcs came charging in and moved, they weren't able to do any of their original attack. So that this was that was their move. Now the defenders got to fight back, taking out 1 archer and 1, 2, 3 others. So because this was the first round of combat, I wouldn't be suggesting that you immediately check for morale on this round. But with 1/3 of their force down, for they started with 12 and they now have 8. They've lost a chunk, but the opponents are still an even match. So the force themselves are still even. And next round would be the determinant as to whether or not it would be worth checking every single round. Because this first round was just them meeting the engagement. So now we roll for initiative. So the orcs won initiative, and in this round, he's got 3 hit points left. They lost a guy, 2 hit points left, 2 hit points left, 1 hit point left. So they've hit 1, 2, 3, 4 people. So they've hit half the force, and now it's the response of the defenders to determine who's going what and where. So remember, roughly, everyone has a 12-foot move. So these guys here, actually these guys all have, they've got a 9-inch move because of the armor they're wearing. So that means that they've got 9 feet in his move. Engage there. They can engage within a couple of squares of where they are if they're not already engaged. Then at the end of the round, missile fire, they've all had their 1 shots, they'll get their 2nd shot at the end. So in the defender's turn, they inflicted a hit there. That's how many hit points are left on that one. It's 2, 3, but the others were left untouched. So now we've just got our final round of missile, and we'll see where it goes from here. So if we look at the top here, when do we check? Well, faced with obviously superior force, such as in melee, one force is hitting twice as often as the other, then we check each round. That hasn't happened. And that's what we're looking for, right there. Oh, okay. So now we go back to the next round of combat. So after this round, that one's down, and this one died. The other attacks all missed, and now it's the response of the defenders. Alright, so in response, we've got 1 down, 2 down, 3 down. Nothing happening there. Oops, and I forgot the check for the final missile. So now we're looking at this and we can say the forces aren't even. We're now at a point where that's how many orcs have died. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's how many militia have died. 4. Now we break. We're going to test morale on both sides. So the balance between this and this is 4. So that provides a modifier of 40 points. Plus 40 for one and minus 40 for the other on the dice roll. So if you've got a 50% modifier, or the militia start with a 55, you have to roll under that, modified, and this particular dice roll here is modified by the difference. So both are under half strength, which creates 1 modifier. There is a difference of 4 between the 2 forces. So that's 40 points of modifier. But aside from that, there isn't much else. The moment the first one runs, then there's the chance of the next one running becomes higher as well. So let's start rolling. We'll work out the numbers and start rolling. So if we start with the militia first, so they're under half strength, plus 15 onto the dice rolls. Then the dice roll is plus 10 for every model slain. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's plus 55 onto this dice roll. And it has to be, remember their base is 55. Minus 10 for every model on that side. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's minus 8. So it's minus 80. So it's plus 15, plus 40, minus 80, which is a total of negative 25 on this dice roll. And it has to be 55 or less for this guy to stay. If he stays, then he has more of a chance of staying. If he runs, he has a chance of running, because a friendly model that's running is a further modifier. So negative 25 on the dice roll. So that's fine. His morale holds and he stays. This guy, minus 25, 30. He also stays. The orcs, one at a time. So again, their base is 50, under half strength. So that's a plus 15. Plus 80. Minus 40. So that's 55. So to this dice roll, he gets plus 55, which is pretty much a run, right? We know that, but we'll roll. 14, it's over 50 once you've included the modifier. So he does a runner. And then that, in turn, causes everyone else to run. Even if they get an 89. Or even if they get a 1. Yeah, the other guy's 1 as well. Yeah, so they're all going. They've all now officially run. Because they ran, he gets a free attack. He does get an attack of opportunity, which he's going to take, and he hits, doing 2 damage, which I think kills his guy. Nope, it doesn't. That's worth marking off. And of course they do run it as well. So the brave soldiers held their ground for as long as they could. And we're here. So the first hurdle is whether or not they've got an overwhelmingly superior force. And for the first couple of rounds, it was very even. So there was no need to check. Once it had become obvious, once it does become obvious, and it does plainly become obvious, when numbers start to dwindle, that's when morale checks can start. And as you can see, once you lose a few, it becomes a swarm. So would all of this have changed if we'd have had this guy in here as well? This is their official leader. This would have been the warband leader, and potentially, as long as he was standing, everyone else would have also held their ground. Likewise, in the militia, as long as he was standing, they really would have held their ground. The moment the leader goes, you're looking at a massive points loss of morale check. And if you defeat the enemy leader, and so on. So it wasn't really relevant in this instance, but what this little chart here does is that it shows what happens if you have that failure in morale. Whether you fall back fighting, completely disengage and retreat, flee in panic, and surrender. The idea is that, for instance, if you had a 55% loyalty base and you rolled a 60, then that's a 5 points difference between what you needed to succeed and what you rolled, and that 5 points would be fall back fighting. So not a complete retreat, but just a bit of a rout. And then you have, if you rolled higher, the difference between what's required and so on. With the examples that we had with the negative lots, it would have all been flee in panic and surrender. And let's face it, PCs don't like to don't like to take prisoners, so I just made everybody flee. Although the 31 to 50% difference is a fair chunk, so that's pretty groovy. But that's pretty much where this bit here falls in to play. So the difference between what was rolled and what was required. So if you had a 55% chance for loyalty base and you're under half strength, so your particular dice roll will be at plus 15, and then once you've made the modifier roll, it takes it to 75. So that's still 20 points difference between what was necessary and what you eventually rolled. So disengage and retreat, that could be the difference between falling back fighting, might still be able to just curl it back, still engaging, pulling back, but once you've made that decision that that's what's happening with your morale, you are falling back. So there, in this instance, had the militia, for example, hit the fall back button, they just would have kept retreating till they're off the board, and it would have been up to the PCs to have tried to rally, and that's where the charisma modifiers for reactions and would have come into play again. So that the falling back, the PCs engaging with the whatever is happening and trying to stop them from disappearing. If the militia had disengaged, retreat, or flee in panic, or chosen to surrender, then there's nothing that they could have done about those. They just, those particular 0 levels would have just thrown their weapons down, just had, we surrender, don't hurt, and then it would have been up to the PCs to decide whether or not to engage with the remaining bad guys. And at the same time, the orcs were also disappearing and running away. So mutual falling back just means that both forces move away from each other to disengage in a to either to finish up the combat and move on. But again, PCs being PCs, they would have gone charging in, which is the next bit, pursuit, but we won't deal with that. So hopefully that's helped with some of the questions on morale, hirelings and henchmen, and it is entirely possible for hirelings to become henchmen. So they've purchased these guys, they've come out so well, and they've distinguished themselves with great valor that they become a more permanent fixture in the party. That has happened. That's happened in a handful of campaigns where I've run, where the players have had a hireling, and then that hireling's ended up becoming its own 5th level by the end. And it's quite good to see them sort of progress, and the players taking an emotional interest in the well-being of another character. So as a DM, what you need to work out is the overwhelming force question, which is twice as many hits. So if this had been one large dragon, and the dragon has been hit more, dragons are more likely to run quickly because they've got a fear of their own lives being taken. They're old and ancient, and they want to live a long life, and they're smart and so on, so they will run. And that's where you sort of, okay, yep, if you've got a quarter of the hit points, that's the same as a quarter of the force gone, and so on. But in this instance, it was just swarm of orcs. And there are some creatures that don't worry about morale, obviously undead. If it was a bunch of 12 zombies attacking, yeah, then it's to the end. Alright, so hopefully this has helped, and I haven't confused things too much, but I've tried to sort of get morale covered a little bit, talk a little bit about some hirelings, purchasing them, when they should be purchased, and if you can purchase them as often as possible, because those 4 guys there would have been potentially hit points off the PCs, of which they weren't, take this guy away, of which they weren't injured at all, because the attacks were spread across the many. And if each one of those represents 5 hit points of damage, these 3rd levels would have been seriously smashed. And notice the fighter magic user didn't need to cast any spells. Remember, wandering encounters, in terms of for the DM, wandering encounters, we try and get the players to waste some resources. So the players have to be careful in this game of chess to not waste resources on something that doesn't provide anything. So those 12 orcs would have generated 120 XP, plus 1 per hit point, so that's another 60. So that's 180 experience points for that one battle. So you tell me, was it worth it? And shared just amongst the 3 players. The militia do not gain, hirelings do not gain experience points. So the 180, 60 each. There. Okay. As I keep saying, hopefully I've made that understandable. But I can cover what I need to cover. I'll go over some points again. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate the questions. I appreciate everyone having a look at my videos. And this is all still part of the DM series. Things that the DM has to have worked out and have an understanding of. So DMs need to work out how morale works. They need to have an understanding about that, which means understanding the motivations sometimes of the wandering monster. Are they just there because you just want them there, or are they there for an actual reason? Though I put a previous video on wandering monsters and the not so random encounters, in brackets not so random encounters, and how to use them. And when we create the big bad guy, at the end, we make them up, but they're often outnumbered and outgunned. So if we can make it a little bit of a struggle for these guys, oh, we would have done it if only we hadn't have wasted all of our spells and there. Well, there you go. Alright. Really appreciate all the support everyone's been giving. Thank you very much. Bye.